I usually begin all these talks by just giving my definition of what I believe a book criticism is, what a book critic should be doing, just to get the ground rules, because everyone comes in with different ideas about what a review should be doing. We have a culture which has all kinds of different reviews that can be found on Amazon, social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and so forth. And a lot of this book chat, or at least writing or talking about books, calls itself reviewing or criticism. To me, criticism is an act of judgment, and it's an act of judgment that depends on evidence and analysis to back up the judgment, to back up the verdict of the critic. So you need a certain number of words, and you also need a certain kind of vocabulary to be able to persuade the reader of the correctness of your, or at least to persuade the reader of your authenticity, of your feelings for the book that you're reviewing. So a review can be a lot of different things. It can be an opinion, it can be a feeling, it can be something you really like the book, but none of that really is criticism. Criticism is an act of judgment, which is ultimately has to be connected with an act of thinking and an act of articulation. You're articulating in words in this case. Although certainly you can do really good book reviews in video and elsewhere, but I'm going to concentrate on words here, language. It is an articulation of the value of the book to you. What is the value of this book? You're articulating it in a way you're hoping to persuade the reader to share or at least communicate what this value means to you. Now, there's a lot of controversy about writing negative reviews. One part of it that's germane to the discussion here is that negative reviews are often seen as being sort of easy to write. At least many critics will say that it's easier to write a negative review than a positive review. Negative review, you get passionate, you can, you really dig in, you have a lot of thoughts, feelings, reaction, because you're very reacting to something that you really don't like. Now, you can react very strongly to something that you like, a book that you really enjoy, but then you run into the problems of language and how to communicate that. Because a lot of the adjectives that are often used in book blurbing or in book reviews that often are quoted for ads is language that is for marketing, language that is for publicity. And the language of publicity and the language of marketing is not the language of book reviewing. And part of the problem of what's going on today is that increasingly the two have been merged. And the idea is that a critique, in order to be positive, has to contain certain language which could be put on blurbs or which are very colorful, fashionable, and run, don't walk to the bookstore to buy this book. That's not criticism. It may be, it can be your passion and feeling, and you want people, you want to share with people your feeling and love of a certain book, and you want them to go out and read it. But it's not criticism. It's a matter of cheerleading, but it's not reviewing because it's not judgment. Now, I gave you in this email an article called "Good Reading, Good Thinking, Good Writing." It's from a really interesting online magazine, which I'll recommend, called The New Critic. It's made up of a lot of young critics. I think a lot of them are around in the Dartmouth area. They're in their early 20s, and they're extremely interesting in that they're really looking at reviewing, arts reviewing, and book reviewing in a really serious and interesting way. So the subtitle of this is "To Criticize Properly is to Show the Process of Judgment, to Struggle with What We Like." To me, even just this subtitle gives you an idea of how to get out of the trap of not writing marketing or publicity language about a book that you care for or a book that you want to recommend. To criticize properly is to show the process of judgment, to struggle. So, one way out, or one way to start thinking about writing an interesting a real good recommending critique, is that it reveals some of the struggle. It's not simply a matter, adjectives tend to be complete, beautiful, wonderful, terrific, amazing, every word a gem. But a struggle indicates that the book that you're recommending is, it gets at the process of how you came around to really liking that book. And that ultimately will bring you to our old standbys of evidence and analysis. You will show the reader or give the reader evidence from the book or evidence perhaps of your ideas of why you find the book so engaging, so powerful, so important, and you will use analysis in terms of ideas or contextualization and other aspects to be able again to create sort of a love letter, let's say, to the book, but a love letter in which is going to be made up of ideas, evidence, and thoughts that will persuade the reader, that will sort of share your experience of having read the book and what you find valuable about the book, which is not simply the conclusion that you found it terrific, wonderful, excellent, you know what I mean, run, don't walk. Uh, I'll just want to go to another line or two here because I just think this paragraph that I grabbed from this essay is such a good one. I am suspicious then of criticism that functions primarily as entertainment. Real-time speech is overly neat or too formed, written work that seems to bypass or evade struggle in coming to a judgment. It's sort of it's rehashing, but also I think giving a little bit more flesh to this idea that a positive review should in some way show evidence and analysis and a sense of the process under which the critic found a book of such, finding the book of such values, of such value. I'm also, there's another, when we intervene in a domain which is primarily that of enjoyment for the majority of people, we must counter the shallow sort of market force that tells people they must consume what is most popular and most readily pleasurable, or that a reader or an intellectual is an identity label to be touted and commodified. A lot of interesting ideas there. I would just simply say that, again, you don't want language that reflects the shallow sort of market force that tells people they must consume what is popular and most readily pleasurable. That means a language which reflects that struggle and process and does not simply throw adjectives. Here's a good example of the throwing good adjectives or throwing adjectives ad nauseum. This is from NPR. So this is an NPR review. I actually looked at a number of different reviews by this critic. They're all essentially sort of the same. It has, I would say it's a compendium of a lot of really, really bad habits. Uh, I bought Austenland on DVD last fall. It's one of my happy place movies. Unsurprisingly, I've watched it several times already this year, this tumultuous year in which so much is going on that I was on chapter 3 of Kind of a Big Deal before I thought to myself, quote, this story feels like Austenland. I flipped to the acknowledgments and spotted screenplay writer and director Ursula Hess's name. Well, duh, Althea. At which point, I just relaxed and let Shannon take me away to that safe, happy place again. Well, there's a lot of problems here, and we're not really getting into all these sort of adjective problem. But here again, you're not getting a review that is essentially going to be about evidence and analysis. You really don't learn a lot about what kind of a big deal is in terms of the book. The emphasis on I makes it very personal, but I don't really know Althea. I don't know her taste. I don't know her background. So I don't know if I really how much I share with her. So the emphasis on personality, the emphasis on, well, I loved it, so you're going to love it. You're going to love it. And again, the idea that really good books or good reading takes you away to that safe, happy place again. Uh, what is that safe, happy place? What is the value of this safe, happy place? If you read the rest of the review, you really don't get very much a good idea of articulating the value of why that safe, happy place is of such interest. Uh, if you go through it, the second graph, I mean, that's the opening graph. There's also so much about Austenland. It's sort of weird. I mean, we really want to write about the book and look and get words about the book rather than about starting with the movie. So that's very peculiar. The second graph, you just have its plot. Third graph, you have plot. Fourth graph, you have plot. And then finally you begin to get some analysis, or you draw away from the plot in the graph that begins. What I assumed at this point was that this adventure would carry Josie through the rest of the book, and we'd pop back to the real world in the last few chapters. Wow, was I wrong? After a few more pages, Josie falls out of the book again. So again, words like "wow," "was I wrong?" Again, the idea that that sort of the plot and then moving into feeling um, really undercuts the credibility of the critic, and it really doesn't convince me that maybe the book means a lot to this critic, but why should it mean a lot to me? I mean, why should I spend the time reading it? And it's really that question is not really answered. Let's go to the next to last graph. Kind of a big deal. It's a ton of fun. And I wish I could give it a 100% glowing review, but I'm afraid I can't. Oh my God, we're going to get some, it's 100%, and we're not going to get 100%. What could that be? It has to do with Josie's Greekness or lack thereof, and her Greek heritage is kind of pivotal to the story. I wasn't raised super Greeky Greek. I didn't go to Greek school and learn all the festival dances. And I'm saying that there aren't any Greek grandmothers out there like Josie's who tell mythology stories to their grandkids at bedtime. It would be like an Italian Nona being obsessed with Jupiter and Juno. All the yiyas I know are far more likely to tell stories about the family's restaurant, food in general, and the lives of the Greek saints. I mean, I guess you sort of get the idea here of the problem. I don't know how much more I want to go with this one, but there are a lot of reviews, not just in NPR, but elsewhere, and you'll find them on, in shorter form on TikTok and Facebook and so forth, which is very personality oriented, not very much evidence. I'm trying to actually, I don't know. I did read this a few times. I'm not sure that there's actual quote from the book. So we don't even have any evidence from the actual book to evaluate the critic. And of course, if you want to write a positive review of a book, in this case a novel, then you want to have a quote from the book. You want to say, this is a really great set. Here's some great sentences, that'll really wow you, and will there's none of that here. So there's no evidence. There's really no analysis. And we do get at least a little criticism at the end, but the overall positivity, I guess, of the review, I mean, I don't know if I don't know who would really get down to the bottom anyway. I mean, usually probably by the middle of the review, you get the idea that this is a book that the critic really likes. And unless you can develop your idea, again, that process of judgment, to develop how you found it so good, how you found it so interesting, then the reader will go, okay, got the idea. You really like the book. It's really good. I've got the plot. I'm out of here. So it's not really a very effective review. I'm going to go next to a review that I really like, and which I think is really well, first off, Edmund Wilson is one of the great book critics of the 20th century. He wrote for the New Republic, the New Yorker, most of the major magazines, and he was considered, an authority. And he wrote both negative reviews and positive reviews. This is a very positive review, but it's not, but it's positive in a number of really interesting ways. And again, you'll see the idea of process, of learning a little bit about how the critic came to their judgment, and how using, in this case, in this review, I think it really shows you the technique of using contrast to find a way to make the book, both by saying in a funny way, by saying something negative, ultimately it only makes this book look more positive. I think you get the idea by looking at this opening. So it's For Whom the Bell Tolls. And again, he's writing this when the book just came out, and I believe it's for the New Republic. This new novel of Hemingway will come as a relief to those who didn't like Green Hills of Africa, To Have and Have Not, and The Fifth Column. The Big Game Hunter, The Waterside Superman, The Hotel Florida Stalinist with a constrained and fevered attitude have evaporated like the fantasies of alcohol. Hemingway the artist is with us again, and it is like having an old friend back. Notice the structure. The structure here is that he doesn't say, hey, Hemingway's got a great new book out. Run, don't walk, get it. It's terrific. He starts off by saying, Hemingway's been in a bit of a slump. And we then hear a little and just really short little summaries of what the novels or books were like before we have that end of that first graph. Hemingway, the artist, is with us again, and it is like having an old friend back. Again, no adjectives. We have old friend, but no, this is a terrific book. This is a wonderful book. This is wow. This is a wow book or whatever. It's an interesting opening because it keys you to the idea that there's going to be an element of contrast, that Wilson is going to be modulating some of Hemingway's earlier books, and particularly his short stories, with this novel in order to talk about the value of this novel. And then we get to the ending, by the way, and the ending is a wowzer, if I may use a adjective that's used in marketing, to really bring everything home. And I think it's also a technique that critics can use to amplify a positive review, and that is by opening up the context. But anyway, you should have read this, and if you've read this carefully, then you'll see how beautifully structured this is. This book is also a new departure. So now we have a graph talking about, here's where he talks about the departure. He also talks, it's also a plot graph. So he's also talking about the plot, but he's also talking about other books, like the method is the reverse of the ordinary method in novels of contemporary history. And he brings in context with other novels, again, similar historical novels, in order to look at this one at the merit and the value of what Hemingway is doing here. In this, he has been successful to a degree which will be surprising even to those who have believed in him most. I'm looking at the first sentence of each one of these graphs because that's an important sentence. And I would say that the first sentence is important in just about every kind of review, but particularly in setting up a positive review, as you're slowly but surely through the structure, changing gears and letting the reader follow you as you go step by step through the review. So in this, he's been successful to agree, which is surprising even to those who have believed in him most. So again, I mean, we're setting up the idea of, what's spectacular and what's really good about For Whom the Bell Tolls and how it's a departure for Hemingway. So again, the contrast to the past sheds value on the light of the novel that he's talking about. I won't go through all the graphs here, but I really think this is a little, to me, this is a little masterpiece of a positive review. He brings up the short stories and he talks about how the short stories have certain strengths that the novel doesn't have. He brings up the novel has certain weaknesses. Notice again, Wilson is not a fancy writer. His language is simple and direct. He has a certain confidence in his authority, so he doesn't really feel that he has to, win the reader over by persuading them through the complexity of his ideas. He simply wants to state his thoughts and feelings as directly as possible. And when you really read it, I mean, he brings in an enormous amount of material about Hemingway and says an enormous amount about Hemingway in a few words. So it's really very nice. Let's go to the graph. There is furthermore in For Whom the Bell Tolls something missing that we still look for in Hemingway, where the semi-religious exaltation of communism has failed a writer who had once gained from it a new impetus. A vacuum is created which was not there before and which for the moment has to be filled. In Hemingway's case, there is poured in a certain amount of conventional romance. And then we go into the love story and he talks about what's lacking in the love story, right? But then the next graph, but then this early work wasn't a time lyric. For him, Bell Tolls is an effort towards something else, which requires a steady hand. The hero of this new novel is no romantic Hemingway cartoon. His attitude towards his duty and the danger it involves are studied with more coolness and sobriety than the case of perhaps any other of the author's leading juveniles. Bang, This is the graph that's going to be before the ending graph. And here he's beginning to sum up and knows he has to sum up after he's talked about some of the contrast and balances with Hemingway's earlier work and with the short stories, what's really good about this novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls. And then we get to the last graph. And this, I think, is really I think now, in particular, if I may say so, since we're in the midst of a war in Iraq, excuse me, a war in Iran, excuse me. Feels like a rerun in some cases, but no, this is a war in Iran. And he was writing this when Wilson wrote this in the New Republic. Of course, it's 1940. World War II is there, and Hemingway also knows and is writing with World War II at hand. And so the critic is not just going to say, "Oh, this is great." He could have just ended it in that, with that next to last graph as a positive piece. Does someone have a question or? The author has begun to externalize the elements of a complex personality in human figures that have a more complete existence than those of his previous stories. Bang, boom, end. He could have ended it there. But the next graph, I think, opens it up and really makes, I think, this positive review opens up the context and gives it added resonance because we are in wartime. That he should thus go back to his art after a period of artistic demoralization and give it a larger scope, that, in an era of general perplexity and panic, he should dramatize the events of the immediate past in terms not of partisan journalism, but of the common human instincts that make men both fraternal and combative, is a reassuring evidence of the soundness of our intellectual life. That's a wonderful graph, I think, for this review. And at that time, he's a critic. He's essentially saying that Hemingway has done what writers should do at this time of what he calls general perplexity and panic, that he should dramatize the events of the immediate past in terms not of partisan journalism, but of the common human instincts that men both fraternal and combative. So to me, that's what makes this such I want to say a model, but an example of a positive review that places the recommendation within the context of its time, within the context of the author's own development as a writer. And also, I think, shows you that a critic in a positive review is not only a consumer guide, essentially saying, oh, this book is really good. You should read it. It's important. It's vital, but also connects it to the context of the time so that the value of the critic is expanded to include, in a sense, contributing, shedding light, reflecting on the importance of the connection between literature and the times that we live in. And that's one thing that critics have done, particularly positive critics, have pressed forward the idea of not only saying a book is good, but also of saying, oh, and it's good in a way that we really need, that it's a nutrient for the mind, for the soul, for what he's saying here is this sort of the soundness of our intellectual life, the soundness of the cultural mind. And I can't say that books like this come around all the time or that give critics the opportunity to be able to do this, but critics should have in the back of their heads the idea that when they're writing something positive about a book, that they're really admiring it. And then they're also talking about, they're struggling in a way to go back to their process of how much they liked it and why. How does it fit into the culture? How does it fit into the time? Does it contribute any more than I don't want to say just escapism, because I don't think there's anything wrong with escapism, meaning that you have books that give you joy and pleasure because it takes you out of life. But books also, a book like For Whom the Bell Tolls and other books, some take you out of life and enrich you and bring you back into life and play a role in life. And I think this review by Wilson, For Whom the Bell Tolls, shows a critic meeting the moment. Since it's 1940, World War II is going on, and there's no idea how it's going to work out at that point. Are we going to win or not? How's it going to resolve itself? So the number of reasons you can see why I'm affectionate about this review, and I would suggest anyone who writes positive reviews or thinking about writing positive reviews, study this to look for a guide for how you can use compare and contrast, and also extending and expanding the context in order to raise the value of the book. Again, the battle is against writing marketing fodder. Writing as if you're the publicist. Writing as if you are the good buddy of the author. Writing as if you're for Amazon, for Amazon.com consumption. And you'll see here that even though he obviously really likes this book, there are not any or not that many. It would be hard to find a lot of blurbable phrases that are to be lifted out, right? He's not thinking that way, right? Because he's taking the book seriously and he's taking the craft of criticism seriously. And he knows that people are going to be reading Edmund Wilson on Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. So he's, he knows that he has, to watch his P's and Q's. He's not writing marketing. He's writing something else. Finally, let's go to, this is a review that was in the Arts Fuse that I gave you to read. And I gave you this one to read because I think I myself, I mean, I wanted to know whether people thought it was a good, positive review or had issues with it. It's certainly an interesting positive review because it's, again, if you can look at it, I lifted, I'm the editor, so I lifted from my subhead what I found to be the most sort of straightforwardly positive aspect from this review. It's of an Iraqi writer that people would not be familiar with, which is why I think David Mahegan, the critic, offers some sort of biographical material about the author, because even though the author has written 3 or 4 other books, the assumption is that readers may not be familiar with him. I picked out from my quote, I cannot recall reading a more poignant and persuasive description of the inexorable descent of Alzheimer's disease, certainly not from inside the sufferer's head. That's sort of the blurb, quote unquote, that I could find, which to me is, I think, a testament to David, that I could not find some easy, quote to bring up, and so I think that's a testament to his writing review, that you have to read it and think about it in order to appreciate his positive take on this book. So published in Arabic in Lebanon in 2023, the story of 2 Iraqi exiles struggling to find a place in the United States preceded the Trump era near pogrom of immigrants. So again, he has his work cut out for him as a critic because it takes place, the story itself takes place before sort of what's happening now. So unlike, let's say, For Whom the Bell Tolls and that positive review, David has to deal with a book which is dealing with an issue that we're dealing with now, immigration, but before the current chaos. I'll use that word, chaos, that we're going through now. Sammy and Omar therefore ask the old familiar immigrant questions. Who am I? Where do I belong in this strange country? How do I live and thrive and make a future? And how do I deal with health, money, and bureaucracy, etc.? These prove to be more than challenging, and neither newcomer emerges unscathed. So again, unlike Wilson, who does talk about Hemingway, our old friend, coming back in the first graph of his positive review, David is a much more laid back positive reviewer. He's not going to be throwing up adjectives. He's going to hopefully invite the reader to continue to read through the review. Again, this does not read to me as if it's sort of marketing copy, but he has read the book, thought about it, realizes that he's patiently convey to the reader, some of the plot and then also some of the virtues that can be found in the book. So I won't go through that. Then here we have some background here. We have more background as he talks about the characters. And we have a graph where he feels, let's see, where are we? 1, 2, 3, 4. This is interesting. He could have taken this graph and put it up top, but he didn't. I think that's smart. He decides to put his graph dealing with, now I better fill in some background on this writer so you sort of know something about him. Then he moves into the structure of the book, that it's made up of alternating sections by way of the quiet style of an omniscient narrator who inhabits their minds and is aware of their history, speaking in the past tense while tracking everyday life and conversations. Talks a little bit about the characters. We considered it, we're going on in the other graphs, we're going on talking about some of the plot and so forth. There is some quotes from the book, although I would have to say that it would have been nice to have had some more quotes from the book. He does have some. We go down to they ask how he felt about the attacks of September 11, 2001. Angry and sad. Why? I don't want people to die. I don't like wars. And then that's then placed in the context of the book. It might have been nice to have a few more quotes. But um, then we move to the more analysis, which and some of the criticism, which I think is positive or somewhat positive. In the novel filled with Arabic speech and expressions, as well as some Spanish, Antoon helpfully supplies a glossary at the end, but inexplicably it is not in alphabetical order. Again, one can write a positive review without necessarily being positive. I mean, we saw that first, even the first review that we looked at, the one that was over the top, really, even that had some reservations. Having reservations in a positive book review only strengthens your when what you feel is good or laudatory about the book itself. Criticism is about discrimination. You're discriminating what you find powerful and what you find maybe less than powerful. And of course, if you find much of power that is powerful in a book, then that will predominate. But the what you find not so powerful will only add to your credibility as a critic. Oh, you've been reading carefully. You don't like everything. Not everything, every chapter, every word, every sentence is not perfect. There are issues here. To me, that's also a testimony not only to the carefulness of the critic as a reader, but it's a testimony to the writer. You're telling the writer, "I'm reading you carefully, and here are some of my reservations for a book that I really like. I really think is good." I think it only adds to the power, to the force of a persuasive force, let's say, of your review. Uh, Marketing likes everything. Marketing is everything is terrific. Marketing is, there's no nuance, there's no reservation. And that's one reason how you know it's marketing. The process, conveying the process of judgment, which is what I mentioned from that earlier essay from the New Critic, that's going to take nuance. That's going to show, yes, this is really good. Here's a problem here, but then it's resolved really well later on, or there are other powerful elements that take over. That's the process of judgment. And that I think will help persuade the reader that you read carefully, thought about the book, and have arrived at a judgment that you think you're trying to be persuasive, makes the reader, because there's so much to read and time is so short, that you really want to make a case for the power and the glory of the book that you're recommending. And let's see, I want to go to, I mean, again, this is an interesting review. I mean, it is a positive review, but it's a sort of, and I want to know what you guys thought about it, because it's a sort of a nuanced review. He just doesn't come out with any of the adjectives, not even like Wilson. You get the impression he thinks the book is really quietly powerful and good and should be read. And I'll read the last graph here, because this is where he finally comes out and really says that this is really a book that's worth reading. But it's interesting because it's sort of really only in the last graph that he comes out. He's sort of like I don't want to say a critical wallflower, but he's been hanging against the wall with this review, quietly talking about what's sort of powerful and what's good about this, and talking about the characters and so forth. And then he comes out at the end. The parallel stories come together at the end in a coincidence that might raise a reader's eyebrows, but it did not bother me. It is lightly handled. Yes, I know that coincidences, given the laws of probability, must happen in real life. Supposedly, they are verboten in fiction. In proper measure, though, I don't understand why anything that happens in real life can never happen in art. In this case, the two major characters of the novel, which are sort of, told, their stories are told in alternating chapters. Eventually, somehow, the author manages to make them beat. And for David, and I'm convinced sort of at the end, hey, that's okay. Why not? If Dickens can get away with it, this writer can get away with it. In this novel, Sinan Atun proves himself to be a skillful and gifted writer, well deserving of a pass. So it's a positive review. It doesn't club you over the head. It may not be, it's a book, it's an articulation of the value of the book, which I think is sort of modulated and quiet and reserved, perhaps because the book is also quiet and modulated and reserved. And yet, I think that to me, and it'd be interesting to know what you guys think, or what people out there think, that, I find it convincing because of the reserve, because of the quiet, without the fireworks. We have a lot of fireworks going on now in book criticism for a number of different reasons. Everyone's trying to get attention in an overcrowded field. There are a lot of books that are coming out. Critics feel that they have to support books, support authors, and so they feel that they have to, they have to go, go at 100 miles an hour in their reviews in order to convince the reader of the value. Rather than going to a film, rather than playing a video game, doing a million other things, you should sit down and read a certain book or take in books by a certain author. So to me, a review like this is valuable because it is so sort of reserved and quiet. And I think it does its work because it just doesn't try to grab you by the lapel and insist that, this book is great. And again, as I said earlier on, adjectives like great, masterpiece, the great American novel, wonderful, terrific, I mean, everyone can fill out lists and lists and lists of these adjectives that have essentially, through marketing, have lost most of their power. So, if they've lost most of their power, how do you write a positive review? Well, I've talked about some ways using contrast, opening up context, but essentially, it's simply doing what a really good critique should do, which is that you use evidence and analysis to persuade the reader of the value of what you're reviewing. Because if you can pick really good quotes from the book, if you can analyze those quotes and analyze the characters and analyze the author's intent in a way that is enticing and tantalizing and inviting and provocative, then your positive review will be not marketing, but will be something that's actually will be not only something, it will be something worth reading in and of itself, but it will be championing the book in a way that is thoughtful and mature. To echo Edmund Wilson, to be a contribution to intellectual life rather
Uh,
than to be a contribution to marketing, which is
yeah.
again
So,
the great devil. Does someone have a question, or what particular questions do you have about writing positive reviews? Did you
Right,
have
right.
any concerns?
Well, I've always been taught to write a balanced review, and I've reviewed since about 1986, and reviewed for I don't know numerous publications, mostly newspapers, but also magazines, and that was the best review that I've ever had. I mean, best information I ever had was to write a positive review. And so when I read the book, I take notes constantly, as I'm reading. I get a galley and constant comments, questions, whatever comes into my mind. And then I sort of try to put that together to eventually come out with a review. But I try not to write, a completely negative review and always find fault with everything. And sometimes that's hard because I mean, the book, I can't mention the name of it, but I just finished reading a book and I thought it was kind of the wordiest book I'd ever had. The man, every sentence, he kind of said the same thing a couple of times, and I was ready to write a completely negative review, but I don't like completely negative and I don't like completely positive, and so I try to kind of add some kind of a balance in there, and so I don't know what your thoughts are on that. but Mr. Marx, but that's where I come from.
Okay, well, no, I mean, you're a vet from, I was reviewing back in the 80s too. So I'm talking to a veteran, and that's good. So, what do I think? I think that if you're writing a positive review, in fact, if you look at the transcript, you'll see that I really think balance is an important aspect of writing a positive review. First off, as you've already said, it's rare for a book to be completely bad, and it's rare
Right,
for a book to be completely good. So
right,
you're going to be discriminating, and there's some books that are predominantly good with some bad, and then there's some books that are predominantly bad with some good. So I
right.
don't think you should shift your review. When you talk about balance, I don't think you should do, I mean, from my perspective, you don't want to do 50-50 all the time. Like fifth
No,
part,
no,
half it's going to
no.
be good, half it's going to be, look, the proportion of your review will be,
Right,
you might want to start off by saying, here's some really good things about this book, but in a graph or two, and then go, but there's so much wordiness and it
right,
becomes
right,
so overwhelming that the
right,
virtues of this book are lost.
right.
And
Exactly.
so
I
that's
agree
what
with you
so I
100%.
think you're absolutely right about that in terms of balance, only that the balance should be dictated by, the elements that you find exciting or not exciting, in a
Right,
book, because that adds to your authenticity. I mean, your people reading your review will grow to respect you, and will respect you, and you'll get credibility by how well, you know what I mean, you talk about, you do this balance between
right,
looking at the good and looking in the bad. Now, there's sometimes books that are completely bad, and there's some books that are completely good, but they're really they don't
right,
come
right.
along that often, really.
Right, right, exactly. I do. I completely agree with that 100%. Yeah. And I'm just trying to think of some of those wonderful people I've worked for. The first man I ever reviewed for was somebody named Tim Warren at the Sun. I don't know if any of you ever know. He was such a wonderful writer, and he was a fantastic teacher. And he was one of the people that, taught me about writing balanced reviews. And then another person uh, was Wilson, Frank Wilson at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I don't know if any of you know him, but he also mentioned balanced reviews. And then, I mean, not just mentioned, they talked to you about it. Like, well, what did you like about it? What did you didn't like about it? Um, the one thing that Frank Wilson said that I thought was great was he gave an example. And again, I was kind of starting out here, but he gave an example of somebody who said that he loved the book so much that he just couldn't express what he loved, that he how much he loved about it. And Frank Wilson told me, he said, well, I told him, listen, I'm paying you good money to tell me
Yeah.
what you loved about it, so you can't get away with that. So there's things that come to my mind too over the years. Like, if I find myself loving a book, I say, "Oh, Diane, like, what are you really loving about it?" Don't don't say I can't tell you. It's just that great, because that won't wash. So, yeah,
No,
agree
well,
with
it
you
won't wash
100%.
because you'll sound like a marketer too. You don't you
Right,
you you don't want to talk about your loved one as if you're selling them. You know what I mean? In the
right.
local marketplace, you're selling them on TV like someone's
I
selling, selling fast food sandwiches, right?
I know,
You
right,
you want to articulate your love in a way that does justice to what you love. And that
exactly,
means finding evidence and analysis, because you also want to share your love and you want other people to love this book. And they don't
exactly,
know, most people don't know who you are as a critic. So all you have are the words on the page to
right,
articulate your love for this book and your excitement for the book. And it can't be marketing. That's what's really tricky about writing positive reviews, because so
yeah,
much of the language has become taken over by publicity. So you
you're
have to
right,
evolve or find a critical language. And
right,
I would take a look at, I mean, I sent out some readings, and I would really look at what I think is a really great little review by, and I have it up here now, The Return of Ernest Hemingway, For Whom the Bell Tolls. This is
Mm,
a critic I
mhm.
really admire, Edmund Wilson, one of the great critics of the 20th century. It's a wonderful review of For Whom the Bell Tolls, written in 1940 when the book came out. And you'll see that
Oh,
it's a balanced review of For Whom the Bell Tolls, ultimately really liking it, that ultimately takes another step, which is in the last graph. It's 1940s. So here's a book about, the lead up to World War II, talking about how this writer is actually doing, a reassuring evidence of the soundness of our intellectual life. So that really good books also play a role in society and culture, right? And a
right.
critic can point that out. So it's about love, but it's also about how books, you know what I mean, really good books play a role in the culture and in society. And that's one valuable thing that critics can point out. Anyway, I would look at this review. I think it's a really
I
nice
will.
one.
Thank you very much. What other reviews would you recommend us looking at?
Well, I will send me I have your email. I mean, first off, I mean, I've taught a class on arts criticism. So as you can see, what I've done here is that this is
Oh,
like a number of
wow.
it. These are a number of Edmund Wilson reviews that I got out of Library of America. I would suggest looking at Edmund Wilson review. I mean, there are a lot of other book critics, but he's a good one. Who cares who killed Roger Ackroyd is his put down, and this is a negative review, his put down of mysteries.
Right,
Who cares who killed this guy because, there aren't any characters. Tales of the Marvelous is Ridiculous is his put down of H.P. Lovecraft uh, and horror stories. The Most Unhappy Man on Earth is a really nice positive review of Swift's Journal to Stella. So I would look at this PDF, which has
okay,
three or four, of Wilson's reviews. That would
okay.
be one good place to go. I mean, they're
Thank
really, and
you.
I'm trying to think of what I have at the top here. This is about his review of the Seven Lively Arts, and it's about, sort of writing about he's writing about a man who wrote about popular culture in a serious way in the 20s. Anyway, I'd look at those, but also send in an email and I can, tell me what interests you, and I'll be able to come up with some reviews for you to take a look at. But Edmund Wilson's a great model, I think,
Great.
for
Thank
a
you.
critic. Even a critics that our age, since you've been writing in
Right,
the '80s. I mean, I still
right,
go back and look at Edmund Wilson and some of the older book critics. I mean, Susan Sontag wrote some really great book reviews. I mean, a lot of really wonderful writers, either on their way up in their career or on their way down, wrote book reviews, and a number of them took it really seriously. And the reviews are really wonderfully shaped and written and serve as models. They're almost like I use them as strategy sessions. Like, oh, how did these critics solve certain problems? Like, when do you talk about the plot, or how do you write ways about a book in ways that doesn't use publicity and marketing? And particularly some of the
right.
older reviews offer some really interesting strategies.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm glad you came. But does anyone else have any questions, or you want to add something to this or not? If not, I can end it now. All right. Well, I think that some good information was shared. I'm so glad to have some critics here. Feel free to send in an email or contact me, and I'd be happy to send you some suggestions, recommendations of positive reviews. The PDF I sent with Wilson has some. When I teach my class, I give them negative and positive reviews from each critic because I want them to be able to see how they handled, what they did when they disliked something and what they did when they liked something. So it's a mixed bag, but there are a couple of nice positive reviews there from Wilson. All right. I don't hear anything. Thank you so much for coming, and keep checking out Viva La Book Review. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
You too. Take care. Take care, everyone.